If you were to simplify point-and-click adventure games down to their base elements, in other words, the things that the genre is known for or puts a particular focus on, you might end up with something as simple as dialogue and puzzle. The original raison d'etre may have been to shy away from the action-focused titles that were around when the genre first started, so rather than test your reflexes, they decided to let people experience a story or get absorbed in a world via a basic point-and-click interface, with some puzzles and mazes thrown in just because. But that's not all the genre has been up to in recent years, as some developers seem to look at these core tenets and think, what if less though? I remember being impressed at games like Dropsy managing to convey its universe, characters and story without a single written word. Apart from the word Dropsy, I suppose, but that was only on the main menu. Now I found a game that basically does the exact opposite. It focuses entirely around dialogue. Subsurface Circular is by Bithell Games, came out in 2017 and is available on Steam for Windows and macOS, costing about £4. And yes, that's the same Bithell Games that brought us the celebrated Thomas Was Alone, and also Volume, which seems to have been completely forgotten about by comparison. I'm not judging here, I haven't played it either, just thought it was interesting to note the contrast. Before we start on the story, the developer has politely asked streamers and video makers not to show anything past sequence 3, or chapter 3 in other words. Not that I tend to spoil a whole lot of plot on this show or anything, but I've decided to abide by that request. The footage will look pretty much the same unless you're reading every single word anyway. The game opens with some freeze-frame shots of robots doing stuff. By the way, like My Friend is a Raven, which we looked at last time, you almost always have some measure of control over camera movement in this game. So if you're wondering why it's jumping around so erratically, that's on me, I was amusing myself. In this sequence we see the robots doing many of the same things humans do. Talking, cradling one another in their arms, threatening them with guns, typical stuff. A crescendo is reached with the only animated robot in the intro walking to a seat and sitting down, which is in a subway carriage. Yep, turns out Subsurface Circular is the fanciest way of saying underground railway line you've ever heard in your life. But here's where the similarities to real subways end, because you, as Robot Detective Theta-11, strike up a conversation with your fellow passenger. Granted, it's done via a private one-to-one connection that no one can overhear. I wonder if we'd be more or less willing to communicate on public transport if that was the default method. Less, definitely less. Anyway, this stranger needs help. Specifically, the help of a detective, and Theta is one, fancy that. The passenger's friend has disappeared, and they weren't the first one this has happened to. After we take the case, not that we were assigned it or anything, and getting the details, our new friend exits the train. And there you have the basic structure of each sequence. Some passengers board the train, you talk to them, they disembark. That process, grossly oversimplified as I made it, repeats itself 6 more times until the story falls out. And lest we forget, this is all done through a dialogue. I'd argue it's not as brave a step as, say, removing written dialogue entirely, but props to the developer for attempting something new. It may look like a overly simple or even silly idea at first glance, but you're probably going to find out something new when you strip a genre down to only one of its basic facets. Bear in mind that thing may be those other facets were really important, put them back. Not to say the game is merely exhausting a list of conversation topics. There are puzzles here, they're just implemented within this dialogue framework. You'll regularly have multiple passengers around at a time, who serve one purpose or another, and jumping back and forth between conversations becomes essential. They actually managed to make some interesting puzzles within that limited interface, although I dread to think how this would be expanded any further than it is. I don't know how that would work. That said, there is a spiritual sequel of sorts in the form of Quarantine Circular, so maybe I'll find out soon enough. The puzzles start ramping up pretty quickly, to the point where I'm pretty sure one of them doesn't actually give you all the information you need to solve it. Thankfully, there's in-game help to essentially give you an easier version of the puzzle, which I eventually took advantage of. Outside of puzzles, getting into a chinwag with these folks will usually give you a small set of conversation topics specific to that character. Once that's over with, you'll get to ask them about your list of topics, shown in orangey brown type colour down the bottom right there. Click a topic to add it to your list of responses, click the newly added response, and ta-da, you're asking about that topic. Not sure why that first extra step is there, to be honest. Feels like you could skip straight to asking about the topic you clicked on. Anyway, conversations may yield answers to these topics and tick objectives off your list, or even give you another topic entirely to keep this cycle going. Pretty much the only other bits of UI you have are the clickable markers above anyone you can talk to, the hint button, which hints at what you have to do next, not much to say, it works perfectly well, the pause menu button, which explains itself, and a button for the map of the Subsurface Circular. I won't say much more about that, but it might be an idea to bear in mind which station you've just come from, that's all. Overall, it's pretty user-friendly, right down to characters getting off the train once their purpose has been fulfilled. I suppose they'd otherwise be sitting there with one dialogue option that says end/do not start conversation/wrong number, so when it comes to narrowing the player's focus and getting the superfluous elements out of the way, this is as good an approach as any. All of that comes before I even bring up player choice. The developer commentary claims hundreds of choices to be made in this game. These must be on the small side. I don't see anything like a branching path here. There's two endings to the story, and you make that decision at the end. It's almost role-playing in a way. Specifically, in a way that goes beyond grinding your stats and plying people with gifts until romance happens. You play Theta 1-1 as you want them to be. Choose how they respond to people and situations. You might not pick the path, but to a certain extent you do define the journey. Now, with such a focus on dialogue, the game is almost asking to have its writing critiqued in more detail than we might otherwise. How it initially feels when you boot up the game is that you've been dropped into some hard sci-fi without a glossary. Terms like tech and management are thrown around willy-nilly without a direct explanation. You'll quickly learn by context what they all mean, so don't be too downhearted if this is also your initial reaction. As for whether or not the dialogue is any good, it's hard to say. I'm by no means an expert on natural sounding dialogue to begin with, and the fact that everyone with dialogue is a robot makes that harder to judge. Not that I've seen it happen, but you can easily see they're a robot, they're not meant to sound natural defence being thrown in there if the writing were to be criticised in such a way. That said, even my uneducated eyes didn't find any eye-rolling lines in there. In fact, the game shows a variety of characters in different professions, different backgrounds and so on. They have their own personalities, but they feel like they're applied in broad strokes. This is the grumpy one. This is the cool old guy. Plus, it's hard not to think of them as these stereotypes when there's only their words and a blank metal face to look at. Then again, maybe I'm looking at this wrong. Like, I'm picking the wrong starting point for what informed this dialogue. Because what these conversations do more than anything is tell you about the world this game takes place in. How the robot population fits into society, how they play a role in the lives of humans and vice versa. I guess I expected a dialogue-centric game to focus on individuals, and it does give that a go. You find out a lot about your fellow passengers. I guess it's nice to think that that isn't the sole focus. World building to me is better when you don't just direct players to a wiki. The game also gets bonus points for naming all the subway stops with computing references. I usually roll my eyes when I see a game crack a joke about Monkey Island or the like, as if that's obligatory for a comedy adventure game to do these days. Here, these references make sense to me. Think about it. If the robots were to name subway stops after people, places, events, or random things that were important to them, surely it would be the likes of Bletchley Park or Berners-Lee, right? And once you complete the game, which only takes around 2 hours by the way, it's even referred to in-game as a short, you can go back and try the developer commentary to get even more insight into the game and its story, which is provided by a self-insert robot character named Bithell who always hangs around on the train and can be questioned at any time either with one of his own topics or on the topics you pick up through gameplay. It's cute and all, but I look at how other games implement commentaries and I think I'd have preferred another approach to this. One that didn't have me jumping in and out of conversations every time I get a new topic. So, is this worth buying? Depends if you think £4.79 is worth it for an evening's entertainment. The game's own Steam page describes it as a one-sitting game, and that is perfectly possible to do. Replay value is up in the air. I don't see the different choices making enough of a difference for me to go through it again. Although the game does take note of your actions, that I can confirm. Yet, I played it all the way through, quite willingly in fact, and at some point I do want to take a look at Quarantine Circular too, if only to see what else they can do with the formula. Then again, pretty much any game shying away from rob item on item puzzles will get some measure of interest from me. I think it's worth it in the end, certainly worth the attempt at making it. Then again, an experiment is usually worth trying at least once. Hello, me again. Thanks for watching to the end. As annoying as it is to remind you about the like and subscribe buttons, they do really help out in terms of visibility on this platform and all that, so I'd appreciate it. And if you really like what I'm doing here and can afford it, you can join this list of people here on my Patreon. Anyway, that's all. Thanks again. I will see you again soon.